Bible.
Yeah, be happy.
As you can see in that video, I was teaching Keaton at a young age just the books of the Bible and how to pronounce those Old Testament books. And then just teaching Addison young biblical songs, the B-I-B-L-E. But now to see them building a faith of our own, to see our son in college and heading towards full-time ministry and faith really becoming his own and that desire to do ministry, to see Addison standing up for things that are right at school, even when it's not popular, to see her serving weekly in our preschool ministry. Lexi, our 9-year-old, just brought home a project yesterday, a writing thing, and Jody got reading it, and in one part, Lexi says, I can't wait to go back to China someday, and I can't wait to travel the world telling people about Jesus. See, children are not a distraction from the most important work. Children are the most important work. And I don't think this next generation needs more inspiration. I think what they need from us is demonstration. This is what it looks like to live it out. That the next generation doesn't need us for information. They've got all the information they want right here at their fingertips. What they need us for is interpretation. How do I interpret all that's coming my way? How do I see that from a biblical worldview? How do I follow Jesus in the midst of all that? Because here's what I tell you is that faith cannot be inherited. Faith must be invested. It must be invested. And today, as we talk about the future, I want to talk specifically and explicitly about children and students. And some of you could think, I don't even have kids yet, Bart. What do I do? Or what does this really have to do with me? I'm just focusing on my own kids, or I just don't have the time. Or you know what? I'm not a kid person, so when my kids get older, well, then I'll take some time and invest it. But no, when we look biblically, when we look at the church in the Bible, this isn't all in. This is all of us are a part of this, investing in the future of the next generation. Galatians 6 says this, so then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are in the household of faith. So we've got a responsibility to those who are in our local church family. Ephesians 2, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you're fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. So a member of our local church, we're part of the greater church. And then Ephesians 5:1 says, therefore be imitators of God as beloved children. See, even those of us who are adults, we're children of God. And walk in love. Let them see that as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. Last week, we experienced baptisms at both of our campuses, and I love watching baptisms. To see one, I think he's a high school senior or college freshman, Harrison, to see him baptize his younger 11-year-old brother, Carson. To see a mom baptize her elementary-age daughter named Mackenzie and tell the story of just what her decision means. To see a husband and wife and all three of their daughters get baptized at our Forsyth campus. In fact, Josh, the dad, wrote this on his Facebook. He said, what an amazing weekend. I, along with my 3 girls and lovely wife, were baptized at Momentum. To have my entire family take part and be surrounded by friends took my breath away. I continue this amazing path that Christ leads me down. Man, what a life change for him, but even for to see his daughters see him get baptized and his wife, and to do that with them. Because in baptisms, what you see is the spiritual impact that people have had on others. Because in baptisms, I've seen parents do it. I've seen grandparents baptize people. I've seen life group leaders. I've seen older siblings. I've seen school teachers, a coach, children's ministers, youth pastors, because they are the people that had a spiritual impact on the person, the student, or the child. So can I ask you a question? Who played a big role in your spiritual journey? In fact, here's what I'd like you to do. Pause for a second. Go get a 3x card, a 5 card, get a piece of notepad, make a note in your phone. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to write the name or the names down of the person or the people that had an impact on your spiritual journey. Write them down. Write them down and hold on to that card for me, or that piece of paper, that note. We're going to come back to it. As we dive in today to some biblical truth, I want to look in 2 places. I want to look at Matthew 18 in the New Testament. I want to look at Deuteronomy 6 in the Old Testament. I think that really gives us a great why and how to really invest in the faith of the future generations. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus is talking here, right? In verse 1, it said, "At the time the disciples came to Jesus saying, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" So the disciples, Jesus' followers, they're kind of arguing about who's going to be the greatest, who's going to sit on Jesus' right and left. And so they ask this question, who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus does this, and calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them. And so Jesus, in the midst of this discussion and this question from the disciples, he calls in a child and brings in the midst of them. I almost picture Jesus putting him up on his knee or holding him in his arms. And Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Because whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." This is a big step because even in that culture, children didn't have a lot of value. And for Jesus to even take time for a child here, and Jesus is considered their teacher, a rabbi, and typically a Jewish rabbi wouldn't take notice of a child until the age of 6. So when the disciples are arguing about who's going to be the greatest, Jesus points to a child. He takes a little child and he says, "Hey, you should start acting like him or like her." It goes on in verse 5, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone, a giant rock, fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." So the first thing Jesus says this is when you lean into the life of a children, you are welcoming God's presence into your life. It's powerful. And he says, when you mess up a child's life, it'd be better that if you were just drowned in the bottom of the sea. And then in verses 7 through 9, I'm not going to read them, but Jesus basically rips into the disciples and he kind of says some strong things about sin. He says, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, hey, cut it off, because it'd be better to get into heaven without a hand or a foot than to be in hell because of sin. If your eye causes you to sin, hey, just rip it out. And so now Jesus has really got their attention, and he says this in verse 10, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven, their angels will always see the face of my Father who is in heaven." And then he kind of goes into a little illustration. He says, "What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of that one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish." And too many times we take this passage of Scripture and we apply it to the idea that people who have wandered from the faith and are now, we go after them and they've been brought back home. But I don't know if that's really the context here or the truth, because the context here or the scene has never changed. Jesus is still talking to the disciples and he still has this child among them. And so Jesus, I think, is comparing a man's concern for a lost sheep to the concern for the child that he's holding in his arms. And just like a lost sheep is at risk, our children, our students are at risk. They are at risk when no one cares for them. They are at risk when no one goes looking for them. They are at risk when we are not investing in their faith. And so what I need us to understand is that every child and every student is at risk. There are dangers and diseases that will stem from poverty and neglect. And there are dangers and diseases that will stem from I would say prosperity, entitlement, greed, pride, selfishness. And these may not be dangers or diseases to the body, but they are dangers and diseases of the heart, of their very soul. So basically, when you see this, what you're seeing from Jesus is that kids matter. Followers of Jesus know that even the small matter, that children matter to God. And so if you care about the God who came as a child, then you have to care for the children that he loves. Dr. Wes Stafford was the former president of Compassion International before he retired, and he said this. He said, Satan's strategy is to go after the weakest and the most vulnerable people on the planet, and that's our children. So Jesus kind of gives us here this why. They matter. They have value. They are loved by Jesus and the Father. Now I want to jump to Old Testament to Deuteronomy 6 and maybe see some practical how this can play out for us. Deuteronomy 6 verse 1 says, now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules. Okay, here's your playbook. That the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it. So this is the Israelites. They've been freed from slavery for 400 years in Egypt. They have wandered in the wilderness, and now it's time to go into the promised land that God has given them. And what is being said here is, hey, you've got to obey. Here's the statutes and rules. Here's how to play this. Here's how to do this. That you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's son. And I think that's fair to say you and your daughter and your daughter's daughters. By keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel. In other words, don't miss this. And be careful to do them, that it may go well with you and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. So first what we've got here is we've got a description, okay? This is what we should be doing for children. This is our example that we need to be presenting. You fear the Lord. And really just the idea of fear the Lord is you respect and you love Him. Respect and love Him. And you're passing that on. You keep all the commandments all your days. Okay? So you're striving to do that. And you be careful to do them. And if you do that, here's what it says. It says, things will go well with you and you will multiply. You'll be investing in the next generation and the next generation. God will fulfill His promises. And then as we continue in verse 4, now we kind of get a prescription. Here's how it can actually happen, okay? Here's how it can actually happen. Hear, O Israel, again, pay attention, listen to me. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So what now? We're kind of getting a prescription. Here's the how, the when, and the where. Okay, first of all, we love God with our heart, soul, and our might. All we got. We got to be that example. You keep them on your heart. That means deep within you. Okay? And then you teach them diligently. It means purposefully. You've got a plan. I'm stepping into this. I'm thinking ahead about it. And you teach them to who? Your children. Your children. Talk about them when you're sitting around the house. This says when you walk by the way, because they would have walked everywhere. I think for us in modern day, how are you talking in the car? What are you talking about? Talk about Jesus. Talk about the Bible. Talk about what God has for us. When you lie down at bedtime, talk about that. When you're all just kind of piled in you and your spouse's bed, you talk to your kids. When you rise, in other words, first thing in the morning. And then there's this interesting verse in there. It says, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Most believe that this was an idea that was intended to be taken metaphorically, not literally. It was this idea that we should keep God's commands, God's truths in view. Okay? So they're in front of my eye, but they're in my hands. I carefully attend to them. I'm keeping them close. But what happens, you're going to see a picture here, is that Jews would later take this very literally. And they would write 4 passages of the law onto parchment paper, okay? And they would put them into these little boxes, which were worn, bound on the arm and on their forehead at morning prayer. So they'd have one wrapped here in their arm and one tied to their forehead. And when I went to Israel and I went to the Wailing Wall there in Jerusalem, you saw traditional Jews coming with those things bound on their arm, that little box, and bound on their forehead with those truths, those scriptures in them. I don't believe that that was really what the intention was here. I believe the true idea was here is that our thoughts and our actions should be guided by the teachings of the Word. And then it's not enough for me just to study the Word, but that I've got to act upon that knowledge. And it's not enough just for me to obey the Word, but I've got to understand it so that I can teach it diligently, specifically to my children and their children's children. It's to the next generation. That is how we invest in the future. So let me give you some simple application. I think applies to all of us, parents, adults even without kids, college age, you've got students and children following behind you, looking up to you. Singles, you've got young people, children looking up to you. High school students, you have middle school students and elementary students looking up to you. So we all can step into this. Very simple application. 3 things. First thing is this: create time. Create time. Don't we all wish we could create time? I'm not saying you need to add more time, find a way to, create or invent more time. But you create intentional time that is built into the rhythm of your day and your family's life, or those that are watching you, those that you have influence over, for the intentional purpose of thinking about, talking about, and living out the gospel. It's not just going to happen. You got to think about how to do it. You can't let your schedule own you. You've got to own your schedule. So I would say the first thing is get serious about what you are doing with your time if you are going to live this out. You've got to create time. The second thing I would say is capture moments. Capture moments. That we're capturing and leveraging opportunities in the course of everyday life for the purpose of gospel-centered conversations. That I'm going to capture the moments where, hey, this is a great moment where I can talk about Jesus. This is a great moment where this verse comes up in the Bible, or how they handle this situation. It's a great teaching moment. And here's what I say. This is as you're doing life. We're not adding moments into life, but what I'm doing is I'm taking advantage of everyday life. Because I think we must invest in the next generation by connecting biblical truth with life experience. How can I capture moments that I can put life experience and biblical truth together? How can I do that? So I'm going to make the most of every moment. I'm going to create time. I'm going to capture moments. And the third and final thing I'd say is this, is celebrate milestones. Celebrate milestones. That I'm going to mark and I'm going to make occasions to celebrate and commemorate significant spiritual moments and milestones of the way God's working in their life, the way God's working in our family, the way I see God working in someone, okay? Maybe I'm going to, moments of baptism, when I see them learning God's Word, I'm going to celebrate that. When I see them living out God's Word, I'm going to celebrate that. When I see them serve someone, I'm going to call that out, point that out. When they invite a friend to church, I'm going to say that is so good, it's so great. When they stand up for what's right, I'm going to acknowledge that. I'm going to reinforce that. So I'm going to create time. I'm going to capture moments. And I'm going to celebrate milestones. And then to the church, to Momentum, our local church, and the greater church, let me talk to you for a second. We have to understand that children can both be churched and unsaved. Children can be churched and unsaved. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we can make is when we have a heart for the lost, but we don't see the children that are right in our circle, right in our church family, as lost. That every child, even the cute ones in our children's ministry, needs the gospel. Every student in our ministry needs the gospel, because our goal is not just to get them into church, to get them into children's ministry, to get them into student ministry. Our goal is to get them into Christ. Right? A personal relationship, a faith of their own. So if the church is to be missional, investing in the future generation, let's be missional with those who are closest to us, the children and the students we already have within our church family. And it's a dual purpose here, because parents and church, we are responsible. The parents and the church is responsible. No, church is not responsible for presenting the gospel to every person in the world, but the local church is responsible for its own families, its own children, and its own students. And if a church is not actively presenting the gospel to children, it's likely not equipping parents to teach their own children too. Here's what's happened. Let's be honest. Spiritual investment in our society and our culture is mostly left up to the home and the church and the parents. And if church and the parents don't reach children, who will? Let me just show you how important this is. Right here is a jar full of marbles. There are 936 marbles in this jar. Here's what that means. When your child is born, you have 936 weeks until graduation, parents. When they get to 9 years old, they're halfway. 436 weeks left. So the bottom line is, you're losing your marbles, right? We're losing our marbles. We are playing for keeps. And it goes so fast. So parents, you've got this visual idea of what your responsibility is, what it looks like for you to invest in the future generation. 936 weeks. Here's what I want you to know. Momentum will partner with you. We're going to partner with you. We're going to partner with parents. We're going to partner with the family. We're going to recruit and train leaders that will invest in your children and your students. But you got to understand the reality too. Well, it's parents and children, and we're responsible. But parents, you've got a bigger load than us. This right here is 50 marbles. And if you take the hour of week in children's ministry and maybe an hour and a half a week in student ministry, that averages up to about 50 weeks. And so our leaders have about 50 weeks to invest, and we're going to make the most of that. We want to try to make that the best hour of their week. But you can see the significant difference for parents, the responsibility. But the church and the parents have got to partner together. They are responsible. And so what I would say is we need you. We need people investing in children's ministry and student ministry because they're investing in the future. Here's what I want you to know is that children are most likely to embrace Christ. They're more likely to embrace Christ. 85% of those who choose to follow Jesus do so between the ages of 4 and 14. This stage of life is a window of opportunity for the church and for parents. And so the church and parents, we have to be mindful of the 4-14 window. That's what it's called, the 4-14 window. Because even in that time, church form an emotional impression of church, okay? The 4-14 window is not only a time when a child is most likely to embrace the gospel, but it's also a time when they will form an emotional impression of the church, what it's like. And not all children will receive the gospel during that 4-14 window. Some will leave the church. Some go off to college and leave the church. Some during their young adult years will leave the church. But one of the most important determinants of a person returning to church will be the quality of the investment the church made during the child's formative years, during that 4-14 window. And then here's what I also want to understand, the church to understand, is that children are a bridge to families. A church that is great at helping the 4-14-year-olds flourish spiritually will attract those who are looking for a church home. Kids often bring families. Some of you experience this. Your kids wake up on Sunday morning, they're like, get up, Mom, get up, Dad, we got to go to church. So here's what I want you to see. That if the church wants to be missional with families, it must be missional with kids and students. Parents, the family needs our help. And we, the church, can come alongside them and do that. You got that white card, that piece of paper, maybe that note you made in your phone, and I was thinking about the names that I would write down. It would be my mom, just how she showed me the love of Jesus. My dad, who was a shepherd and a pastor, not a real shepherd, but he was just that shepherding personality. He was in ministry and he just cared for people, served people. I went with him many times on home visits and hospital visits. I think of Dale, was my youth minister in high school, how he invested in me. Bill Peroni was the student pastor that I did an internship under while in college, and he and his wife Lisa invested in me. Think of the lead pastor who I served under for 13 years before I came here to Momentum, Bob Cherry. He really lived out what it was like to have a personal faith in Jesus. My father-in-law, who I just look at him, Jody's dad, and I see a godly man. That's what it's like to be a godly man. 2 Scotts in my life. One, we went to college together. We did ministry together. We're still kind of best friends. And another Scott who came to our church in Louisville as a single young man, very successful, got married, had kids. Faith changed his life. He's now an elder at that church. When I look at those 2 Scotts, I see transformation and just what that invested in me. Well, I want you to take the other side of that piece of paper or scroll down further in that note, and I want you to write down the name of someone that you need to lean in personally. Someone that you should be investing in their faith for the future. Maybe it's your own child. Maybe it's a student. Maybe it's a niece or nephew. Maybe it's a neighbor's kid. Maybe it's a kid at church. Maybe you and your spouse need to look for a young couple that you need to invest in and show them what it's like to have a godly, Christ-honoring marriage. Who is it that you need to be investing in? Because, hey, I know what's going to happen. The excuses are going to start, right? I'm not qualified. I'm not ready. Gosh, I'm so worried. What if I mess someone up or don't have all the answers? What if I don't even have it all together spiritually? So how can I invest in someone else? Here's what I want you to understand. This is not about what you can do, but if you commit to it, it's about what God can do through you. So here's my prayer. for us as a church, as parents, as families, so that we can invest in the future. Here's what I want to pray. God, I want to pray that you will open our eyes to show us how much children matter. God, I pray that the needs of our children and our students will break our hearts. God, I pray that the thought of caring for kids and students in the future excites us, that investing in the future creates a passion in us. God, I pray that even sometimes it frustrates us because of what is happening to the next generation, that we're so motivated that it moves us to do something about it. As the church, as parents, as the family of God. God, we thank you for Jesus. We thank you that you loved us so much that you sent your own Son. That was your investment in us. It's in His name we pray. Amen.